I was halfway through fixing a busted fence post when my wife, Kara, came storming up the dirt path with our 2 dogs trailing close behind her. I could tell from the way her jaw was clenched that something was off. "They just showed up," she said, voice tight. 3 of them, from the HOA. They came up to the porch and started yelling about code violations. I wiped the sweat from my brow. "What violations? We're not even in their jurisdiction." "That's what I told them," she said. But the loud one, her name was Marlene or Marlena or something, kept waving a clipboard and saying our barn repainting was unauthorized construction. I exhaled slowly. "Let me guess. Middle-aged, bleach blonde bobs, sunglasses the size of dinner plates." "Yep, Marlena Tillerson." She said she's the compliance director of the HOA over in Willow Ridge. I shook my head. Willow Ridge was a development over 2 miles away. We weren't part of any HOA. Our ranch had been in my family since before Willow Ridge was even a dirt road on a planning map. "And then," Kara added, her voice breaking a little, she said if we didn't stop the unauthorized work immediately, they'd start issuing daily fines. When I laughed, the other 2 stepped up and said, "You'll regret not cooperating." One of them even cracked his knuckles. That got my attention. I dropped the hammer and looked toward the driveway. "They threaten you," Kara nodded. "They didn't know you were out back. They thought I was alone." I told them to leave, but they just strutted off like they owned the place. I'd dealt with a lot over the years as county sheriff, but HOA enforcers threatening my wife on my own land. That was a new level of stupid. I made my way up to the front porch and sure enough, there was a bright yellow notice of violation taped to our door. My name was misspelled, and the notice claimed we had violated Article 12, Section B, exterior structural modification without approval. I snorted. Article 12 of a set of rules that didn't apply to us. That's when I noticed the bottom of the notice. Failure to comply will result in legal escalation and property liens. They were trying to bluff us into compliance. Problem was, they didn't realize they'd just tried to play hardball with the man who signs off on their county enforcement requests. I pulled out my phone and called Deputy Harlan. "Get me everything you can find on the Willow Ridge HOA and their enforcement practices," I said. "And send someone out to grab the footage from our porch cameras." "You got it, Sheriff," he said. "Something going on." "Yeah," I said, eyes fixed on the dusty trail leading back toward Willow Ridge. "Looks like some folks figured they'd try expanding their empire. Time to remind them whose county they're in." I walked inside and kissed Kara's forehead. They picked the wrong ranch. The next morning, I was already halfway through my coffee when Deputy Harlan rolled up in his cruiser. He didn't bother with the front door. He came straight around back, where I was sitting at the picnic table, flipping through the zoning maps of the county. He dropped a thick manila folder on the table. "You're gonna want to see this." I opened it. Inside were printouts of HOA meeting minutes, emails between their board members, and complaint logs. Some of it was redacted, but enough was clear to get the shape of what they were doing. "They've been targeting homeowners on the outer fringes of their development," Harlan said. "Mostly older folks, widows, people who inherited property. They send fake citations, then follow up with threats of liens or lawsuits. A few folded and paid. Others sold their land outright to avoid the harassment." I flipped to a spreadsheet labeled Expansion Initiative Phase 2. Our address was right there, listed under High Priority Acquisition. "Where'd you get all this?" "Public records request," Harlan said. "And a tip from someone on the inside. One of their own board members is getting cold feet, said things have gone way past what was agreed on." I stood up slowly. "They're trying to force people out." "Yeah. But here's the kicker, they've filed paperwork with the county zoning office to amend their HOA boundaries. They're claiming a voluntary annexation of adjacent properties." I narrowed my eyes. "There's nothing voluntary about any of this. And the paperwork, forged signatures. Yours included." I didn't say anything for a moment, just watched the breeze roll across the field behind the barn. Then I picked up my phone and called county legal. By midday, I had a meeting lined up at the courthouse with our zoning commissioner, legal counsel, and the registrar of deeds. I brought the file, the porch cam footage, and a copy of our original deed. It went back over 60 years, with no reference to any association or development restrictions. When I laid everything out on the table, Assistant County Attorney Lorna Reyes tapped her pen twice before speaking. "Sheriff, if these signatures are forged, and I believe they are, this isn't just harassment. It's criminal fraud, possibly racketeering depending on how far this goes." "I want to prosecute," I said. "And I want a full audit of every parcel they've annexed in the last 5 years. Zoning Commissioner Halstead nodded. "We'll suspend their pending applications immediately, and I'll have our office cross-check every property transfer involving Willow Ridge." Lorna looked at me. "You going to inform the homeowners?" "Not yet," I said. "First, I want to see how far they'll go." That night, I set up a motion-sensitive trail cam near the front drive. I wanted to know if they'd come back and how bold they'd get. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, just past 11, a pair of headlights crept down the gravel. I killed the porch light and watched from the upstairs window. A dark SUV pulled up, engine idling. One man got out. He wore jeans and a dark polo, nothing official. He walked up the steps, took something from his pocket and slid it under the door, then he turned and muttered something to the driver. They didn't see the small red glow from the trail cam nestled in the fence post. After they left, I retrieved the envelope. Inside was a typed letter. "Final notice. Continued non-compliance will result in legal seizure of assets and civil penalties. You have 24 hours to dismantle all unauthorized structures." It was signed by Marlena Tillerson and stamped with a fake county seal. By morning, I had warrants for both the driver and the man who delivered the letter. The SUV's plates traced back to a property management firm, one that handled enforcement services for Willow Ridge. Deputies picked up the delivery guy at his office. He didn't resist, but he immediately lawyered up. The driver was harder to find. He'd clocked out of the HOA's payroll system a week earlier and hadn't been seen since. But we had his face. With the evidence mounting, Lorna filed for a temporary injunction against the Willow Ridge HOA, freezing all enforcement actions and suspending their board's authority to issue fines or file liens. That stopped them cold for now, but Marlena wasn't done. 2 days later, she showed up at the county office building with her attorney, demanding a meeting with the zoning board. I sat in the back of the room as she launched into a performance worthy of a courtroom drama. She claimed there had been a clerical mix-up, that the forms were filed in error by a junior associate, and that she had no knowledge of any unauthorized enforcement actions. Then she made the mistake of lying under oath. "I have never authorized my staff to interact with any property owner outside Willow Ridge's jurisdiction," she declared. Deputy Harlan, sitting 2 rows ahead of me, hit play on a tablet. The porch cam footage played on the courtroom screen. Marlena, standing on my porch, barking orders at Kara and threatening to issue fines. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Lorna stood. "Your Honor, we request immediate contempt proceedings and criminal fraud charges." The judge nodded once. "Approved." That was the first domino. Over the next month, more residents came forward. Some had been bullied into signing compliance agreements. Others had paid thousands in bogus fines. One woman, a retired schoolteacher, had been forced to sell her home after repeated threats of foreclosure. Each case built the foundation for a class action lawsuit. I wasn't part of it, couldn't be, given my office, but I made sure the plaintiffs had every piece of evidence we'd collected. With Marlena's arrest, the board scrambled. 2 members resigned within days. The third tried to claim he'd been misled, but his name appeared on too many of the forged documents. He was indicted alongside her. The county placed the HOA under provisional oversight. A court-appointed administrator was brought in to audit their finances, which revealed a whole new mess: embezzled funds, falsified expense reports, and shell companies used to funnel money into private accounts. Meanwhile, I installed new fencing along the northern boundary, topped with security-grade trail cameras. Not because I thought they'd come back, but because I wanted it clear that this land was not for sale, not for annexation, and not for intimidation. Kara returned to working with her rescue dogs, and I focused on rebuilding trust among the neighboring landowners. We held a town hall at the VFW Hall where over 50 residents shared their stories. Some cried, most were angry. But by the end of the night, we had a committee formed, a real one, not some HOA scam with a mission to create a legal defense fund and offer pro bono assistance to anyone being harassed by a rogue association. I didn't go looking for this fight. But when Marlena's people stepped onto our land and tried to muscle my wife, they crossed a line I don't let anyone cross. They wanted a quiet takeover. What they got was public exposure, criminal charges, and a community that rallied harder than they ever imagined. And they'll think twice before they try something like that again in this county. The courthouse hallway echoed with the sharp taps of Kara's boots as she walked beside me, her clipboard filled with statements from other residents who decided they'd had enough. We weren't here to watch anymore, we were here to deliver. Lorna met us at the entrance to the records division, her expression unreadable. They filed a motion to dismiss the fraud charges, she said, leading us through the double doors. Claiming the board was acting in good faith and that Marlena was operating outside the scope of her authority. Kara lifted a brow. They're trying to pin it all on her. Exactly. But this isn't just about one woman, I said. That entire board signed off on forged annexation documents. They had a system. We caught them mid-operation. Lorna paused in front of a locked room and keyed in a code, which is why we pulled their server, she said. It's been combing through their email backups. You'll want to see this. Inside, a monitor lit up with rows of messages. One thread caught my eye: subject line, expansion incentive structure. The sender, a property developer based out of Houston. The recipient, every board member at Willow Ridge. I leaned in. They were being paid. Quarterly kickbacks, Lorna confirmed. For every property coerced into signing a compliance agreement, the board received a percentage of the acquisition value. It was all funneled through a firm called ClearPoint Holdings on paper, a real estate consultancy. In reality, a shell company. Kara set the clipboard down with a quiet thud. So that's what this was about, not power, just money. No, I said. It was about both. By late afternoon, the sheriff's office had completed its raid on ClearPoint's local office. They tried to shred documents, but one of their interns had panicked and emailed the customer database to herself before quitting. That file contained names, dates, and amounts, every coerced sale, every fine collected under false pretenses, and every payout sent to board members. The biggest shock came when we found a name we hadn't expected: Councilman Rick Donnelly. He was listed as a strategic advisor for ClearPoint. I'd known Rick for over a decade. He'd always been a little too polished, but I never guessed he'd be mixed up in something like this. Lorna looked over the documents with a practiced eye. We're not just talking about civil fraud anymore, she said. This is organized racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy. You've got a sitting councilman laundering money through a fake consultancy while directing an HOA to drive landowners off their property. I nodded once. Then we go federal. We coordinated with the state attorney general's office and the FBI's white-collar crimes unit. Within 48 hours, a grand jury was impaneled. Subpoenas went out. Laptops were seized, and Marlena? She suddenly stopped cooperating. Her attorney requested a private meeting with the AG's office. Word was she was ready to talk, but only if she got a deal. I didn't attend the meeting, but Lorna filled me in afterward. She gave them everything, she said. Emails, bank transfers, voice memos. Turns out Rick wasn't just advising, he orchestrated the whole thing. He recruited the board members, set up the shell companies, even coached them on how to forge compliance signatures without triggering state notices. Kara crossed her arms. And what did she get in return? A reduced sentence, Lorna said. She'll still serve time, but she won't be the example. He will. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions, court motions, and press conferences. Rick was arrested during a city council meeting. The footage made the evening news, him being led away in cuffs while trying to claim it was a misunderstanding. The most chilling part came later, during the wiretap review. One recording caught Rick speaking candidly with a developer. The sheriff's wife is stubborn, he said. But she'll fold if we push hard enough. Send a couple of guys out there, make it clear her husband can't protect every inch of that land forever. Kara stared at the transcript for a long time before folding it in half and handing it back to Lorna. I want that played in court. It was. During Rick's arraignment, the prosecution played the full audio for the judge and jury. His attorney tried to object, but the judge overruled. The courtroom was dead silent when the tape ended. Rick was denied bail. Meanwhile, the class action lawsuit against Willow Ridge gained momentum. With the board dissolved and a court-appointed administrator in place, the HOA's assets were frozen and earmarked for restitution. Each affected homeowner would receive compensation, some for property lost, others for damages suffered from threats and harassment. But it didn't stop there. A group of residents, led by a retired firefighter named Luis Ortega, filed a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. The court approved it within a month. The development would now be governed by a neighborhood committee with rotating leadership and mandatory transparency. On our end, I installed a new gate at the entrance to the ranch, solar-powered, with license plate recognition and two-way audio. Kara and I didn't want to live like we were under siege, but we weren't going to be caught unaware again either. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sun dip behind the hills, Kara broke the silence. You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't caught them that day? I looked out over the pasture. They would have kept going, parcel by parcel. Until there was nothing left to resist, she nodded slowly. We stopped them just in time. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The court cases would play out. The restitution would come. But the real victory was something quieter. The knowledge that no one else would be harassed, threatened, or pushed off their land by a fake authority hiding behind a homeowners association. And for the first time in weeks, the air felt still again, like the land was settling back into itself. Like justice had finally taken root. The courtroom was packed to the walls by the time jury selection wrapped. Not because of the usual crowd chasers or media blitz, though there were cameras parked across the street, but because folks who'd been bullied, fined, or driven from their homes by the Willow Ridge, HOA wanted to see with their own eyes what justice looked like. They'd come from everywhere, some leaning on canes, some in faded work jeans, others in Sunday best. No one spoke unless they had to. They just watched. I wasn't there to testify that day. My role as sheriff kept me at arm's length from the prosecution, but I was still granted a front row seat, just behind the railing. Kara sat to my left, flipping through notes we'd gathered from half a dozen residents who hadn't yet gone public. She wasn't a lawyer, but she'd become the voice for people who'd been too scared to speak up. And today, the prosecution planned to call the one witness who could tie everything back together. The HOA's former treasurer, Dana Renshaw. Dana had kept quiet longer than most. She wasn't one of the loud ones, never showed up at the town halls we hosted, never filed a complaint. But after Rick's arrest and Marlena's deal, she reached out. Her motivation wasn't guilt, it was fear. When she took the stand, she didn't make excuses. She didn't cry. She opened her folder and read from her ledger dates, amounts, approvals, and the exact breakdown of where the money went. Her voice didn't waver once, even when she described how Councilman Rick Donnelly had introduced her to a special account used to streamline contributions. The judge allowed the prosecution to submit her personal notebook into evidence. Each entry lined up with bank statements already subpoenaed. One entry, circled in red, read, "Sheriff's land equals high leverage, push hard. Use code 12B. Rick says 3 visits max. The room tensed. My jaw didn't move, but my hand curled instinctively around the armrest. After Dana stepped down, the defense tried to pivot. They called the HOA's former security liaison, a man named Gentry who'd been in charge of hiring the private enforcement crews. He insisted the board had only ever issued verbal directives, and that none of the intimidation tactics were official. The prosecutor raised one of the HOA's printed handbooks from the evidence table. Can you explain why your name appears under the Property Compliance Task Force section, right next to a 3-tier escalation chart? Gentry blinked. That wasn't enforcement, that was. Suggested protocol. The prosecutor tapped the page. Tier 3 involves entering private property without consent. That's not a suggestion. That's a felony. Gentry's attorney called for a recess. It was denied. Outside, the sky had turned the color of wet ash. A storm was crawling in from the west, slow and deliberate. It matched the mood inside the building. By the time court adjourned that evening, 4 more indictments had been filed. 2 board members, the HOA's legal consultant, and the head of Clearpoint Holdings. That last one was the biggest catch. He wasn't just a facilitator, he was laundering the funds through dummy charities and offshore accounts. The IRS had been brought in days earlier, and now they had everything they needed. Back at the ranch, I parked the truck and sat for a long while before heading inside. Kara had already fed the dogs, and the porch light was off. She was in the living room, going through one of the letters we'd received from a woman in South County. She'd been hit with over 20 fabricated violations in 3 months. Her husband had passed during the ordeal. She blamed the stress. "We're not done, are we?" Kara asked without looking up. "No," I said. "But we're close." The next morning, I met with the district attorney and the state AG's representative. They'd decided to consolidate all the charges into a single racketeering case under the RICO statute. That meant moving the trial to state court, where sentencing carried more weight and where restitution could be enforced without appeal. "I've seen land grabs before," the AG's rep said, "but this is something else." They weren't just pushing people out, they were turning neighborhoods into investment portfolios. You stopped it at the edge. I didn't respond. I was already thinking about the next move. With the trial moved to state court, the civil cases were paused, but that didn't mean the damage stopped. One of the remaining board members tried to quietly sell his house and disappear. We served him with a subpoena before he made it out of the county. Another tried to scrub her name from the HOA's previous tax filings. Unfortunately for her, a paper trail doesn't vanish just because you delete an email. Weeks passed. The new trial date was set. Jury selections began again, this time in a larger jurisdiction to avoid bias. When testimony resumed, the court heard from 42 homeowners, each one telling a different version of the same horror story: threats, forged letters, fake liens, and relentless pressure to sell. One man described how they'd forged his late wife's signature on a compliance contract, then claimed he was in violation for not maintaining a hedge line that didn't exist. Another recounted how someone slashed his tires the night after he refused to sign away his easement rights. The judge didn't interrupt. He let every story play out, and the jury listened. The turning point came when prosecutors introduced surveillance footage from a former HOA board member's home office. He'd accidentally recorded a conversation with Rick where they openly joked about clearing the edges. Rick laughed when someone brought up a family with kids who just wouldn't move. He said they'd break eventually. The jury didn't flinch. The verdict came in 2 days later. Guilty on all counts: racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, witness intimidation, criminal trespass. False representation of government authority. Rick got 32 years without parole. Marlena received 5 with the possibility of early release for cooperation. She wouldn't be returning to Willow Ridge or anywhere near it. The remaining board members received sentences ranging from 7 to 15 years. The private contractors who had enforced the threats were hit with separate charges and banned from working in any housing-related field again. The Civil Restitution Fund was established within 3 months. Over 180 homeowners received compensation. Some used it to rebuild, others moved on. But none of them had to fear another notice taped to their door. As for Willow Ridge, the development was placed under county supervision. The HOA was formally dissolved. What remained was restructured into a voluntary neighborhood committee with no enforcement power, and all decisions had to be voted on by residents. No more secret meetings, no more fines. No more threats. At the ranch, spring came early. The pastures bloomed clean without the tension that had hung in the air for months. Kara and I hosted a potluck for the people who'd stood up, spoken out, and refused to be broken. Some brought casseroles, others brought stories. All of them brought relief. As the sun dipped behind the hills, one of the older neighbors, Clarence, a retired mechanic who'd lived in the area longer than anyone, raised his iced tea and said, "Here's to the sheriff who reminded them we don't scare easy out here." I didn't say anything. Didn't need to, because this wasn't just about me. It was about the people who held the line when no one else would, and now that line was stronger than ever.